Tēnā koutou katoa. Haere mai ki tēnei hui, te iwi o rangatane, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all for coming back from lunch to recommence arts, culture and heritage. Thank you to our guests with us today. Look forward to hearing from you all in your various capacities. We go back to our order of business. We began already with apologies, but bearing in mind we've now come back together with a slightly increased public gallery, I will just go over the housekeeping and safety procedures again. So again, bear with. So toilets located on the ground floor of this venue. Entry and exit is through the front door only to enable contact tracing. We're still doing that. Non-smoking facility, first aid kit is available in the main office. A defibrillator also available if we get really exciting. Please make yourself aware of all the positions of the emergency exits and evacuation procedures. In case of an emergency, exit through your nearest marked exit door. Assembly points, front of the building. Safety warden and venue staff will assist if they're required. Otherwise, we should look to our committee administrators. Thank you. Moving back to our agenda, I have no notification of additional items and have received no declarations of interest. I'm also unaware of any public comment. Speak now or forever hold your peace. There being none, we will move to item 5 on the agenda, which is the presentation of the Central Energy Trust Arena redevelopment. And I will hand over. We have Sasha Haskell, General Manager, presenting with Wiramuti Awi and Warren Warbrick. So welcome and over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. It's with pleasure today that I present alongside my able colleagues here the cultural and heritage overlay for the arena master plan. It is a design overlay that is to be incorporated within the construction of the actual arena, and we've integrated this process within the design and construction work so that whilst we are creating the new arena, we consider the design implications of that and can tell a story around the culture and heritage of the site. The project is bedded within the need to reflect on the significance of the site. It's a major asset for the city, its heritage and culture, and the redevelopment of it is an exciting feature for the city, and it's something that we need to take care of and do our best in this new development to really promote not only the heritage but also the future, exciting future for the city and this particular asset. I'm now going to pass over to Wiramuti Awi, who is a key member of the project steering group and obviously a representative of iwi, who has been an important partner in this project.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Oh, I better start again. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Isn't it good to be back off to level 1? Mainly because I can kiss all of the fine ladies in the room and hongi the men. Te rangatira, tēnā koe, Heather, te mea, rangatira, katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Anei rā mātou tūropu kua rau ake nei raru i te koro ai o Tarangi Māori. Ki te kaua nei, ki rungu te kaupapa o te rā. Kua kaupapa au te aroha mo koutou e whakaoti. Just a brief translation. For most of you know, sitting around the table know what I've said. I said, what a jolly fine bunch you look. No, that joke didn't go down well at all. But anyway, on a serious note, Te Pēti had said some time back, 178 years ago, that we need to walk together. And in my viewpoint, this is a perfect example of rangatani walking together with non-Māori and doing it in love. And the kōrero you're about to hear from my younger whanaunga here is very permanent for all of us in rangatani. And of course I spoke about the korowai being a covering of tarangi Māori, of love that goes beyond all understanding. And I don't know how you feel, but to come and see what we've just been through, the importance of being kind to each other, as the Prime Minister said. But men couldn't go playing golf. They had to stay home with their wives, and they had to do all that work around the house like me, that we've been doing for the last 3 years. There's nothing to do with our kōrero, but it's very important that we say these things. But on a serious note, is to value each other and how important we are to each other. I mean, I must have seen Heather. Is that right, Heather? Yeah. But the values of appreciating each other and the good things that you all do for our city, including all those good people sitting over there. And that's important. So, I'm going to hand it over to my cousin now. He's going to give you the good kōrero. Is that right? And we're going to hand it back to you. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Thank you, Waramu. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this design overlay and the thinking behind it, and introduce you to some key people within the team. So it's been applied as a storytelling feature to the venue, and it's been integrated into the construction. Previously we at times create something, we build something, and we think, oh, we need to tell a story and overlay it over the top later. That's not only more costly, but it means that you're not really thinking about the end when you start on these projects. And this is an exciting feature, I think, of the venue and the arena master plan, is actually we've incorporated the design thinking into the construction as we've gone along. So it's quite a different approach. And I'd like to introduce people here. We've got Warren Warbrick, who was a designer for the rangatane feature that we've incorporated as a key foundation of the actual design within the arena. I've got Lily Fredericks, who has been a key person she's been tasked with liaising with the community groups, because the arena has multitudes of community groups, community interests, and liaising with those groups, getting the stories, researching the history and so on, and bringing that together as part of the interfacing with the design team. And then I have Dan Males, who's director of, Local Collective. Yes, I've been talking about this morning. Local Collective, who do a lot of the landscaping and the finishes, deciding on the finishes. So Dan has been integral within that design team. So those are the personalities at play in bringing this to you. And without further ado, I'm just going to flick through the presentation, and we'll talk about the different elements. And I'll hand it over to maybe Warren to start with on the actual rangatane design, and he brought some things here to talk about.
Kia ora. Is this working? Yep. Most people who know me really know that I hate microphones, and also I walk around a lot when I talk, and I have a lot to say to you in a very short amount of time. Now, the concept that I came up with that has been worked on in terms of the arena is only one part. I've been working on this idea for a very long time. So if you think about all the other projects that have been happening around the city that involving rangitane, if you look at Wild Base, Whātonga at Linklater Park, the airport, all of these areas that we're doing at the moment, even for Friday, Ahemate, they all have a cloak or kahu involved in the work in terms of the carved work to which Craig Kawana has been working. This is all to create a thread. The idea is under a whakatauki, which is he aho tangata. He aho tangata means the threads that bind us. okay, the threads that bind us. The aho, actually, if you think about weaving, I don't know if you know anything about Māori weaving in terms of making cloaks. There are several things that are used within that. One is called the Turituru. The Turituru are the pegs that are placed into the ground which link the making of the cloak to the whenua and to the atua above. So that is the sacred stick, if you like, which is called a Turituru. There's another one on the other side. Between the two of them, there is a thread that runs across. That thread is called the aho tapu. The aho tapu is the sacred thread that starts the embodiment of the cloak. Over these, or over the aho tapu, are the whenu. They hang down. Two things you must remember. The aho tapu is a female line. The whenu that drop down from it are the male lines of genealogy. Now, once all the whenu are dropped down, then we weave them across using the aho. The aho is what binds all of those lines together. So it's the female lines that bind us together as a community. And that forms this. I'm showing you the inside of the kahu with all of the whenu and the aho tying it together. Within tradition, also, the way I'm using it in terms of our communities is that the aho and the whenu are the relationships between all the communities in the city. The embodiment of the cloak is our full community. The idea of using this for the arena is that if you can think of the whole squared land of the arena, when you actually look at it, it's a real mess. You know, different buildings all over the place. But what we can do is use design features to pull them together or to make wayfinding areas and direction. So what we do is we look at the whole ground as the cloak that combines us all together. The cloak that I'm thinking of that for this design work is known as a papai roa. The papai roa is a cloak that is worn by our rangatira, or our chiefs. They're usually worn in layers as well. And the idea of the layers is quite nice because we can layer story upon story upon story within them. So it's an ongoing process or concept. Now, within tradition, let's say that all of you are a hapu. And us few over here are a hapu. But within this instance, you guys are all in a need or dire need or in a place where you need help. Whereas we over here are a bit wealthy. So we have the resources to help you. So what the rangatira would do was go up in front of their rangatira and throw his cloak upon the ground to state symbolically that you are now underneath the cloak of our people and we will manahi you or manaki you to become strong again. Does that make sense? So that's the whole idea, or part of the idea. The other part of the idea is when you look at the embodiment of the cloak or the kaupapa, which is the inside here, that's what is symbolic of the grounds or the coming together of the people on the grounds. But all of the top part, all of these here, these are known within tradition as huka huka. Within every stitch of aho, there is the huka huka. You know, the reason why I'm thinking or talking about this is that everything on top of the land at the arena is a huka huka. Whether it's a building, a piece of history, how it is used. So everything that is done at the arena is a huka huka to that cloak or the embellishment of it. So in terms of the design work, up here we have the tānako. The tānako border is a very strong statement of mana amongst our rangatira on their papai roa. So here is the starting point. So it's used in a sense as a welcoming mat into that concept of bringing everyone together within the threads that bind us, or he aho tangata. That pattern will be abstracted and used in different parts of the area. There are other areas in terms of this project where other artworks are going to happen, and we won't talk about those until that time is ready. But also this idea is going to be used on a larger project, which I'm not allowed to talk about, which I'm involved with, and you'll see that appear in the next 5 or 6 years. And some of you might know what that project is. Yeah, so this pattern will be abstracted throughout the grounds, and it'll be symbolic of the cloak, but also layers of cloaks and layers of meaning to our community and to bring the community together. But it's not just all about us as rangitane, about everyone. Ka pai?
Thanks. Thank you, Warren. Just to that point around the other community, we've got, it's got a history of defence, and we've had, it's obviously used for multi-sport activity. So the beauty of this design is that it is also an acknowledgement of those other stakeholders. So it's the design, which I'll get Dan to talk about some of the surfaces that you'll see in closer up, but you know, the chevron or the triangular shape that you see within the design is applied across motorsport, and it's used within motorsport. It's also applied within the ranks within defence. So you'll often see stripes on the patches of defence. That's also that chevron design as well. So it reflects a multitude of different users within the arena. So and it's also directional. So maybe Dan, you could talk a little bit about how we've applied it on the surfaces, so to give that directional sense and provide some energy, I guess, into the centre. So I'll hand over to Dan on that.
Yeah, what we've done with, and as you can see, this image sort of collects sort of a lot of ideas into one image. So we've got sort of 7 or 8 items on here, and it's really about, we started off talking about an overlay, but it's really an overlay of ideas and an embedded design. So we're not just layering this on the surface, it's actually embedded into how the space works, how you enter into the space, the lifting up into the plaza, and how that edge is treated. And then it's those layers of meaning as well. So different people can read into it different things. So it means different things to different people. So it's about bringing people in and allowing them to read into it what they want to read as well. So there's a number of items in that, and then it's I guess how that's embedded into the ground. So the Warren's work up the top, we've worked really hard to figure out how we bring that into the ground and into the paving, and how we actually craft that into the landscape. So it's not an overlay. It's embedded. It's taking something with a real fine sort of crafted hand to it and bringing it into the materiality. So it's there, and it's got a life that is equal to the life of the space, and will go on through the generations. So you'll see the design here, and then as Sasha was saying, the meaning of how that can be read. But when you stand back, and what Warren was explaining is in the overall meaning and how that feeds back into that larger thought, and it goes into all of our furniture elements. So the seating, it's about how that works and how we embed that into that. So it's sort of taking these elements and dropping this meaning into it, and actually crafting them so that they become items of beauty. The seats glow as little lanterns, and that the design then spreads out over the paving as you walk through, so it has a different meaning at different times of the day. And then Lily can probably talk through some of the other layers of thought that have gone into this as well. So how we actually allow people to use the space and move through it during a big event, but then stop and use the space and understand it and understand and learn from it on a more intimate sort of scale as well.
So in terms of the community input, there is elements here which community have been able to put an input into the storytelling. And when you go through, there are etchings into the pavers, which will have a variety of quotes from various user groups, notable people within the Manawatu, and there is Turituru, obviously, as part of that, and some famous quotes that we can put an overlay within it. But it'll be subtle. It's not going to be in your face. It's going to be subtle as you go through. Lily, would you like to talk about the timeline? Maybe.
Kia ora koutou. So I'll talk to you briefly about how we're presenting the story and the content side of the narrative. So we've got the kahu, the cloak that weaves everything together. And then we've got so that is apparent in a design treatment, but we also have these huka, which are our amazing stories that are presented on top of that. And you'll have seen in the original image, we have these brilliant vertical banners, very high and prominent. You see them as you're driving past, they're lit. It's essentially a timeline. It takes us, so if you're a visitor entering that site, you understand very quickly, glancing, that you'll see that this site goes way back. You know, the history starts in 1800. It's amazing. But you'll also be able to explore through quite a dynamic plaza, so up and down and all sorts of places to discover. If you want to follow that story, you can follow that story, and it comes through to today. As you go, you find these etched quotes, which are voices of the past, prominent civic figures. You know, there have been many involved in this site. But then also contemporary voices, which you would have seen, which the challenge has really been about how do you take something with such enormous provenance. You know, the story goes back a long way. Really, there's some really important moments, really important community events that have happened here. So honouring those and giving them their, also saying that, hey, you know, this is a facility for our community. They need to use it. They need to love it. They need to feel that it's theirs and that we're celebrating them ongoing. So we're not freezing history in time. We're actually saying history continues to be written. Everything that happens here every day could potentially be another one of those moments. And so we have, you know, sports coaches with inspiring messages, bicultural messages which, you know, have an inspiring undertone to them. That's the sort of thing we're looking to bring through, in addition to the heritage story. Little feature stories that you can discover, which were actually anti-skate tabs that we turned into a story moment. So we've looked to be very sustainable in our approach. We're not creating things unnecessarily. We're using materials that are there, surfaces that are there, and adding story to them. And also a screen, which we're presenting dynamic content, which flows down the bridge. Do you have an image of that, Sasha? So those elements that I described are static elements. They'll have English text, they'll have Te Reo Māori text, they'll have astonishingly good black and white photographs from the Palmerston City archives. And we have this incredible dynamic display as well. So while you have your permanent elements of story, you have this, which will have some of the heritage static images and moving image content, which can scroll like a screensaver. But you have the wonderful ability to flip this content. You can create a feature story. You could have an Anzac Day commemoration with poppies floating along. You could have a major speedway event where all of a sudden you've got your stock cars racing from one end to the next. So you can create quite a dynamic living display. And we would hope that those moments that are created ongoing are added onto this kind of space, and that the people that are using it are celebrated and they see themselves and they see their whānau, and that's all about bringing the community in. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Lily. So just in terms of the Speedway Pits, we've got a grassed area down the front, obviously all the way down Cuba Street. This will be a multi-purpose recreational space, and the Speedway Pits asphalt will be line drawn into a running track, so it can be used as a recreational space. And what you see there is the sort of running track running between the two grassed areas. So when Speedway is operating, it obviously be the Speedway. When it's not operating, it becomes a recreational multi-purpose facility. And we're already sort of running things like drive-in cinema, those sorts of things. So it opens that space up for that to occur. I will also say that the red colour you're seeing is just a placeholder. It's not the actual colour. It's just to show you the certain elements within the design. So so that's the Speedway Pits and how that is being designed up. And that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So was there anything else? We'll probably leave that to question. You might get some questions on that. Yeah. I know we were a long time talking, so I'm going to sit down.
Thank you. I will open that up for questions from elected members, but thank you all for coming and making that presentation. I don't know quite what I was expecting to see, but that's great. So are there any questions, elected members? I think you've stunned them into silence, which is really a work of genius. Okay, thank you. There are no questions, so feel free to move somewhere. With the gallery is quite full, but find a seat, and we'll move to the recommendation, which is to receive the presentation for information, which I will move, be seconded by Councillor Barrett, and I'll open for any comments anybody has on that. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. As being part of the Arena Master Plan Steering Group, this was shared with the with that group, and I was encouraged when we had the infrastructure meeting last week to see if we could bring this forward to expose to other members and even for the wider public, because there's some stunning elements in it, and I think it builds some excitement of what we are doing there with the entranceway plaza, and you can see the thread being in the whole wayfinding for the whole arena, which I think is quite special. And so to bring everyone up to speed, I think was important, and I appreciate the way it was done today with all the elements outlined with more detail. Found a lot of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Were there any other comments? Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly wanted to acknowledge this in terms of the partnership with iwi. It's really nice to see iwi being included at our design stage, and rather than us getting to the end of a project and thinking that how can we incorporate something there, and it's really pleasing to see, I guess, such a wide and broad story that's being able to be told through the work that's going on at what many people will just see as a sports ground. So yeah, that's quite special to see.
Thank you for those comments. I have to say, I totally agree. And when the general manager said it was less expensive to embed stories, I'm sure what she meant is it's a much better way of doing it because it's enabled us to embed that partnership in this facility right from the beginning. As Councillor Rutherford said, just great to see the depth of that storytelling coming through in that. I think what I took from the presentation is this position of honouring our stories, our history, but celebrating our future as well, and sitting at a particular moment in time. It's a real privilege actually to be able to look back over that history and pull out those important moments, as well as positioning our community for the future that this facility will enable. So I think a very impressive piece of work, and thank you for bringing the presentation. We will look to vote on that, please. So on the voices, that the presentation be received for information. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll move in our agenda to the next item, which is the minutes. Committee resolves that the minutes of the Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee meeting of the 4th of March 2020 public be confirmed as a true and correct record, which I'm happy to move, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Any questions or comments on the minutes as included in the papers, councillors? Being none, we will look to vote on that. On the voices, all in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 7, Cultural CCO's draft statements of intent 2020 to 2023, presented by Julie, who is fighting her way out of the public gallery. So many people. So elected members, just in terms of how we'll run this, Julie will present very briefly her report. Well, if there are any specific questions on Julie's report, I will give an opportunity for this at the beginning, and then we'll move into each of the CCOs in turn, having an opportunity to present their statement of intent, take questions. Then we'll come to the end of that questioning process, wrap everything up, put the recommendations, and open for comment on all of those together. So, Julie, over to you for your report.
Thank you. Is that working?
You're very quiet.
Is that working now?
Better.
Kia ora koutou. As Councillor Bowen has just explained, that's exactly what's going to happen. I just want to explain that Anna Yates is here, as is Becca, as the author of this report. Anna is here to answer any financial questions to save her climbing over the rest of the public gallery. My main role here today is to point out the small error on page 20 in the finances. So if you want to turn to that page, there are 3 bullet points underneath the table where it talks about the current assets. So just to let you know that 833,000 is an error, and that the correct figure is in the table above 388,000. So the table is correct, the bullet point is wrong. And we're happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you. That probably takes at least one of the questions that people had out of that. Opening for questions on the report before we get into the CCO's individual reports. Anything for the officers? Councillor Naylor.
Thanks for the report. My questions are really around the financials and around the process, because I think the recommendations include, sorry, my computer's not moving, to find the recommendations. So the recommendations include developing a proposal for increase for 2 of the CCOs for consideration through the 10-year plan process. And the other statements of intent include a 3-year budget, which includes increases. So, for example, with Te Manawa, the 2% increases do equate to around 65,000 a year, which is actually, in a monetary term, more than the items that have been for the other CCOs that will be considered in the long-term plan. So I guess my question is, in looking at and approving the statements of intent, how much does that lock council into confirming the council's funding for the CCOs for the outer years that are included in the financials?
Hello.
Hello, Becca.
So generally speaking, of course, inflation, I mean, this might be more of an Anna question, but inflation isn't necessarily confirmed until the year in question. So really, I think when the 10-year plan sets those budgets, we always know that there is going to be a little bit of fluctuation depending on what the inflation ends up being. However, in 2 of the statements of intent, there's a specific jump up above that and, you know, potentially fluctuation due to inflation. So that needs to sort of be tidied up, I guess, in terms of a process. Anything you want to add to that, Anna? No? Does that answer the question?
And just one further question. On page 101 under the Te Manawa financials, I'm assuming I would ask you this, or should I? I'm not sure if I should ask this to Te Manawa, but the 2022-23 amount is actually a reduction on that page, which I'm assuming is an error, and it is a different amount to the Pncc contribution that's outlined on page 103 for 22-23. So if that's an error, it just probably needs to be corrected, but I just wondered if I should check for clarification if there was any intention for that amount to be lower in that year. Do you see the part I mean?
No.
Shall we could perhaps come back to you with an answer
So it's
during the Te Manawa
Yep,
presentation, if that's okay.
yeah, that's fine. It's under the revenue part for the Pncc operating grant.
Which page were you on, Councillor?
101
So you're
at
in the
the
Te Manawa report.
at the very top. I can bring that up under.
Okay.
the
Maybe
Te
Te Manawa
Manawa
can just have a
report.
quick look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
The CFO wanted to make a comment, I think, on the previous question.
No, if I may, I guess it's on both questions. That work?
Yes.
I guess it's on both questions around future funding and the long-term process in terms of council, in that next year and coming up with a long-term 10-year plan, it's a little bit like the conversation earlier on. Everything's on the board, if we're honest. What you're seeing here is a statement of intent, not a budget. And so just urging caution around that.
Thank you. So I think my takeaway was that the 2% was an inflationary figure that could move. The additional sums asked for are being referred to the LTP. Summary, yes? Good, thank you. Any other questions on the officers' report? No. Thank you. If you want to take a step back, but don't go too far just in case. And we will invite the CCOs to come forward, and we'll go in the order that it is in the papers, which means the Globe is first up. And Jerry, I rather feel that means you're on your own, because I've received notes here saying apology from Maxine, she's unable to be here at the revised time, and apologies from Margaret, who's not able to attend due to technical issues. So are you there, Jerry?
I am indeed, yes.
Excellent. So we will hand, there isn't anybody else from the Globe lurking?
No, it's just me.
It's just you. You're a little bit quiet, so we might just see if we can get that unusually.
Yeah.
Right, over to you, Jerry, to present your statement of intent, please.
Okay. Well, obviously we've trying to factor in with the COVID-19 issue, did make a bit of a complete change to our plans for 2020-21. With advice from council, we revised our numbers quite considerably, but we still aim to obviously push on and we still want to try and hit those targets that we would have liked to have hit. We did lose obviously 3 months from March till I guess the end of June for this year, but our plan is to be honest, our bookings are starting to come in again. We had our first show on Saturday night. I think the people are ready to come back out to the theatre again, and we'll just keep pushing on with what we've been doing and working with our community groups, working with the council, working with everybody just to, you know, keep growing what we're doing here at the Globe.
Thank you, Jerry. Short and sweet. Can I start just by asking, it sounds like you have a fairly high level of confidence that business is going to get back to normal quite quickly, and that's borne out in your draft statement of intent.
Yes.
That's in front of us. How confident are you feeling? Is that too hard a question?
Well, no, I mean, obviously we're now at level 1. We're confident in the sense that while we might have a quiet July and August, from September onwards, a lot of our bookings are still going ahead. Like we're kicking off July with the Manawatu Youth Theatre, and our bookings are going really well. You know, now these guys are used to getting 200 people for all their shows. And the fact that we did start off last week, obviously with the tickets going on sale with social distancing, which meant we were pretty much down to about potentially 60, 70 people able to attend. But now that we've gone to level 1, the bookings are just going really well at the moment. So obviously I wasn't here this time last year, but looking at how it went last year and just looking at the figures, we're tracking on what we were doing last year for the July school holidays for the Manawatu Youth Theatre. So I'm using that as my first gauge as to how things are going. Now we did lose the Manawatu Jazz Festival, but there was a press release, I think it went out yesterday or today, and we're going to do the Manawatu Jazz Festival decanted over the last 5 days of October. So Roger Fox has taken that, and rather than saying, right, we'll just do it next year, he said, right, let's do a smaller version in October. Some of our shows got rescheduled rather than cancelled or postponed. So I think while July and August is looking a little bit quieter than what we'd normally expect, from September onwards, it's really looking quite good for us. And we've already been in touch with all the people that we would like to have here and said, look, we're open, we're ready for business. Come and see us. So, yeah, look, I want to be confident, because it's just, we've had the last couple of months where we've been back at the Globe and doing maintenance and tidying up and planning. And, you know, it was just great to have that comedy show on Saturday night. The place was just buzzing. It was great to have people coming through again. So, you know, being confident and being, you know, positive about it, I think, you know, will help us get through this time.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple more questions, unless anybody else has got one. Just carry on. So I noted in your financial statements, really, you've probably got 2 pinch points, I suppose, which are that you've taken on an additional member of staff, and at the same time, you're predicting that your donations will fall off a cliff. So taking those 2 things together, that's what is leading into you forecasting a net deficit going into 2021, 22 and
23.
Yeah, so that,
yes.
And that is, I'm assuming, why you've why we're looking at that additional funding element coming through the long-term plan. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, one of the reasons why we are facing a deficit is that we do have depreciation costs for 2021, 2022, and 2023 of $66,000 to $70,000. So that obviously has a big impact on our final line. The increased funding from the year 2022 was, we see a need to have a technician at the Globe Theatre. And that was kind of part of our plan, was to apply to the council for increased funding to allow us to have that person available. The donations have obviously got a big drop, because we had a couple of our big capital projects, was the new lighting rig for Globe 1 and the new sound equipment, which was, if I remember correctly, it was something like 84 and 27, like 111,000. Now that has been gained, and the lighting rig is in, and the sound equipment is on its way. So that's kind of why there is that deficit, I believe, in 21 going forward. The depreciation is a big part of that.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. And my last question was just a comment made in the Trust Board's forward to your report, which is about a difficulty with the timing between Council's expectations of reviewing your business plan versus how that aligns with this report for the statement of intent. So you might not be able to answer that, because that is the Chair's comment, I suppose. But how has this timing sat for you?
I think what it mainly fell into was that, obviously, with people being away and things like that over January, which is a quiet period for us, there wasn't a board meeting. And then the plan was to start, you know, working on our business plan in that February, March, April time. But of course, once we went into lockdown, we weren't able to do that. We talked about doing it on a Zooming, but when we've had our board meetings on Zoom before, it's just people's internet connections, things drop off. I felt that if we're going to talk about our strategic plan and our planning for the next so many years, it needs to be done in person. It needs to be done at the theatre, so we can sit around a table, get the whiteboards out, and you know, come up with all those ideas.
That's
so
helpful. Kind of, I think I can chalk it up to a COVID-related issue.
Yeah, and we are definitely looking at June, July, you know, to get this business plan sorted for the final deadline of July 31st.
Lovely. Okay. Question from Councillor Naylor.
Yes.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate you being with us today. One of the recommendations in front of us is to support the proposal going forward for consideration to the 10-year plan for that $50,000 increase. And as a percentage, that's about a 44% increase. And as elected members, we often are in the position where we need to talk to people and justify increases to our ratepayers. And so I just wondered, it would be helpful to hear from you in a simple way how you would explain to a ratepayer how they would get that additional benefit from that increase in investment. Would you be happy to do that for us today?
Sorry, Jerry, Jerry, whoa, hold on. Sorry to shout at you on the other end of the phone. Can I ask us to park that question, because the recommendation is to refer this to the LTP discussion, and I think that will be the appropriate time to talk about what we might achieve or not through that funding. And I really don't want to get into that in this report.
Okay, so it would be helpful for me to have an understanding of that in deciding how I vote on that recommendation today of whether to refer it to the LTP process. That's why I asked the question.
I think the information is in the report, and I'm not comfortable putting Jerry in that position to answer that question now. It might be something the officers want to comment on from their report.
The only comment I'd make really is that this is a bit of a heads up that request is coming, and I guess that you may choose not to adopt this recommendation, but the request will still come.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. That's sensible. Any other questions for the Globe? Sorry, Councillor Barrett had indicated previously.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Jerry, for the report and the statement of intent information that we have in front of us. Was quite pleased to see, sorry, this is getting us a bit of feedback. Quite pleased to see the quite comprehensive set of performance measures that you have in your statement of intent, and just wanted to get a perspective from you of how much effort it's taken to develop that set of performance measures and how much effort goes into actually monitoring it.
I think because we've had those performance measures over the last 2 or 3 years now, for me at the Globe since I came on board, it was a matter of just, you know, following on from what Denise had created over the last number of years. Now, we did have a bit of quiet time, obviously, with the COVID, so we were actually able to do a really big push with a lot of our hirers and users to get more information from them. And for me personally, and from the Globe, obviously, these are the measures that, you know, help us go forward. I have had a bit of discussion with some of the council officers regarding the RBA methodology that the council is looking at implementing, and as we mentioned in our statement of intent, I think we need further discussion with the council officers about that, just to kind of see how what we're trying to measure at the Globe fits in with what the council is trying to measure. And I actually have some meetings this week with some of the council officers, which I'm going to bring that up. So, you know, but for us, it is these statistics and all this information that we're gathering, it just helps us look at how we're doing. People who fill out these forms from their homes or on the internet, or from, you know, when they get them sent through in their emails, the comfort of doing it at home allows a lot of people to actually make good comments rather than, like, you know, trying to catch them as they're coming out of the show when most people just want to go home. So yeah, it's just really important to us that we keep this going.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful to understand, Jerry. Appreciate it, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
There are no further questions for the Globe, so thank you, Jerry. You're welcome to continue to view remotely.
Okay.
We will move on to Culture Birch Trust Board, and I think we have Nikki Birch, Grant O'Donnell and Patricia Keller attending. So all of you not strangers to this process. So Nikki, obviously the manager, and Grant, our board chair. Patricia, you're staying put? Staying put. Excellent. So thank you both for coming in. Nice to see you in person. Over to you to present your statement of intent.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Deputy Mayor, councillors, council staff. I'm not very good at extempore speaking, so I'm going to read what I've written. Some of it you'll
Grant,
have heard.
sorry, can I just ask you to hold the microphone
Yep.
quite close to your mouth? It doesn't pick up if you're far away.
Okay, some of you, you will have heard some of what I'm about to say before, and you will no doubt hear it again, particularly in relation to COVID-19. So, you have before you our draft statement of intent, emphasise the draft. It's illustrating our plans and expectations for the next 3 years. The work on this was commenced months ago and was largely settled until the intervention of COVID-19. Consequent on that, there have been some hasty changes, including, among other things, changes in the timetabling of various matters for action. The trauma to our economy and the uncertainties that flow from it mean that the gaps between our intent and reality may be larger than is usually anticipated. You'll be aware, for example, that the budget will provide for a 1% rather than a 2% increase in the council grant. We have also made adjustments to anticipated outgoings, but there is no certainty that there will be any reciprocal drop in those. The amended statement by direction of council officers is not included with the draft before you, but will, of course, be included with the final statement. We hasten to assure Council that, notwithstanding the uncertainties, the Board is committed to the achievements of the positive goals that we've set out in the SOI. It appears, however, that there will be further changes to be made to the financial statement, which were not presaged until recently. The current SOI is required to mesh with the new long-term plan, which is under development. As part of that process, Mr. Bryce Hosking, Council Officer, has prepared a memorandum regarding the division of responsibilities for capital, renewal and maintenance. And while we don't take issue with the intent of the review and indeed encourage scrutiny of past practices, we note that a similar process was carried out at the commencement of the last long-term plan review, and that resolutions made then morphed into practices which suited the peculiarities of each organisation. We suggest that some further discussion should take place between Council and the CCO Board and management before councillors decide on a course of action. After all, this review was only brought to our attention after lockdown and after the SOI submission deadlines had passed. Moreover, there have already been agreed changes to the description of the proposed works for Catcher Birch from those set out in the memorandum. Depending on the outcome of councillors' deliberations, further changes to the SOI may be required. We wish to sound a note of caution. Consistency in managing capital renewal and maintenance between CCOs may not be desirable or even practicable. Each CCO has its own peculiarities. The commercial leases which are established between councils and the trusts are essentially fictions and should not be relied upon to determine the division of obligations. We would welcome the opportunity to further discuss the issue with council officers on the basis that regardless of whether the costs lie, or costs of renewal and maintenance lie in the books of the city or on the trust, there should be and will be in place adequate funding and robust and clear processes for each CCO to ensure that the fabric of each facility is maintained. That's my presentation, thank you. Now, Nikki will wish to expand on that, and there are some questions that we have in relation to the report which has been provided, particularly in relation to the financials at the bottom of what I have here is page 5. where comments for the final SOI state reduce council operating grant to level set in 10-year plan 2018 to 28, adjusted for inflation, and update expenses accordingly. We're uncertain as to what that means. No doubt some clarity can be given for that.
Noted that. We can come back to that with the officers in question. But Nikki, did you have anything you wanted to speak to more generally?
No, I'm quietly positive based on the questions that were asked before that we're seeing bookings coming back in. We're getting a reasonable level of inquiry. Turning those into bookings is probably a little bit harder. But I certainly think that obviously we've been closed for 2 months without any bookings, so that's going to hit our bottom line. I don't think we're going to see a sort of full recovery, if you like, until early next year. However, we're obviously still in people's minds. The phone's ringing, the emails are coming in, so we can only be positive, I guess, and certainly in how we deal with them. And as Grant's talked about the nuts and bolts of the property, that's a sort of slightly separate issue that, you know, we've been quietly working, if you like, on our 10-year plan and looking to the future of how we can actually develop the property, and all of those things kind of mesh together. So they're all important elements.
Thank you. So we'll open up for any questions of Councillor Birch board. I did note in your paperwork, which I've now lost, as you go through it, there are quite a lot of little asterisks which then say council support will be required for some of those elements. There are quite a lot of those elements where we say council support will be required. How do you envisage that support coming about?
Through the 10-year plan. So rather than what we did was we indicated that some of those might be capital development items that we would apply or ask for through the 10-year plan. It felt that it was a better way to show that, you know, we may require some assistance, we may be able to fundraise. We quite clearly don't have a lot of capital ourselves, but we have these plans to develop the property, be a premium tourism spot, as well as continue, you know, renting it for events, etc. But in order to do that well, we are going to have to, you know, do some development, if you like, on the property. Hopefully we can raise a lot of it, but if we can't, you know, we're seeking it from council through that LTP process.
And just on the subject of external fundraising, I've got an echo. How would you describe that environment for Acacia Birch going forward?
We've been lucky enough to raise about $15 or $16,000 this year towards the coach house development. We've just installed new lighting for the upgrade of one of the areas. I think at the moment it's a little bit hard to tell, but I don't think it's going to be easy going forward. I think you're going to have to sort of pick your areas. We've also received some money towards the entertainment side of our 125th anniversary, which we obviously had to delay, and now that's going to be on the 1st of November. Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit tough, but I suspect hopefully in 12 months' time we'll, you know, be in a better position to put in those applications. I think that there are a number of small projects that we can try and undertake in-house that will at least show that we're working towards, if you like, the bigger projects.
Is your financial statement on page 61, in donations and fundraising income, there's a TBA, 11,500 budget forecast 2019 to 20, 2,774 20 to 21, and then nothing following.
We will determine, I guess, as we're putting in the applications for the projects. It was a matter of looking at this during the COVID and saying, well, there are going to be a lot of people struggling out there to get funding. It's clear by the program of works that we're considering doing that we're going to try and apply for funding, but we're really not counting our chickens, I guess, in that respect.
And you're probably not alone in that. It's a very uncertain environment, I think. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Or anybody? Councillor Naylor.
My question is probably for you, Madam Chair, given the response to my last question, because I was quite interested in hearing from Katja Birch in terms of the perceived benefit of the decision that we need to make today about whether to ask the Chief Executive to bring back a proposal for an increase. So I'm just wondering if it's not appropriate for me to ask that question today, will there be the opportunity for us as elected members to be able to hear directly from the CCOs regarding that at some time in the future?
Hold on one moment, caller. So the General Manager will get back to us on exactly how the concerns of the CCOs across the board will be picked up in that, including these operating grant increases. Thank you.
Thanks.
Further questions? Thank you very much, both. Which means that we move to the Regent Theatre. And I will invite, who do we have? So Chair of the Board, David Lee, Deputy Chair, Susan McConaughey, and Tanya Koptko from the board. And noting a noticeable absence for the first time in as long as I've been on council, no Charles Forbes beside you. So elected members are aware, I'm sure, that Charles has retired. Are we saying retired? Is he retiring?
I asked him the question, do we say you retired? He said, I can't afford to.
So we'll go with resigned. Charles has left. Charles has left the building, which I will say from my seat as Chair of Arts, Culture and Heritage it's been an integral part of the building of the Regent Theatre, been involved in that theatre for as long as most of us can remember in one way or another, and will be missed. We'll leave a gap, especially in terms of institutional knowledge. So we hand ourselves over to the Board of the Regent to deliver your statement of intent without his words behind you. You will have to answer the questions, David, and I'd like you to use the microphone to do so, please. So over to you to present your statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, fellow councillors, not fellow councillors, sorry, that's taken me back a bit, councillors. I've got to, first of all, fess up that my forte is certainly not writing SOIs or annual plans or anything to do with bureaucracy that you as a council have to face and rightly hand on to us. So in keeping with my forte of being a delegator, I have delegated the task of forming and presenting our SOI to Susan with the help of Tanya and our other board member, Mark Mabbott. So with that, I mean, there'll be lots of questions about where to from here for the Regent and all those sorts of things, and we'll explain that at the end of perhaps your question time. So I just want to present it. You guys hopefully, maybe, will have questions. I won't be able to answer them, but Susan or Tanya might. Let's leave it at that for now from me.
We appreciate your candour, so we'll hand over to Susan.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm not going to reiterate exactly how COVID affected us. We all know that. In many ways, like the Globe, we deferred our meeting until we were able to meet face-to-face to do the final putting together of the SOI, which I believe was actually quite a relevant thing to do. It's in a bit of a different format, as you can see. And part of our performance measures are still quantitative. the big difference this year in terms of where we're heading to is we are actually really interested, like the Globe, on the qualitative information we can have. So in future, probably next year, alongside those numbers, you'll get some benchmarks after we have set up the surveys and formulated how we get our information from both our hirers, users, and of course our patrons. But to be the best provincial theatre, we need to have that information. We need to know that we are giving them the very best experience. So in terms of that, that is our big major goal, to undertake that. Another big investment we will be doing is looking at upgrading our website and also all our social media platforms, so we're able to get information out to the community much more effectively. So that is a huge undertaking that we're still in the process of doing after about 3 years. It's a long process. And the other one, of course, will be the continuation of adding to our absolutely spectacular sound system. And I absolutely will not believe that anyone will not come away doing that. My favourite was 2001 Space Odyssey. I got that as my launch music, and oh my gosh, it will blow you away. So that is an amazing investment that you have helped us to achieve. But alongside that, by having this wonderful sound system, our sound desk and the desk behind the scenes now need to be updated as well. So that's in terms of what we're looking at to still build on our equipment to enable us to be the foremost theatre, especially in this region, hopefully in the future New Zealand as well. We're working on a whole lot of aspects. I would say Bryce's report is very timely. Part of not being able to put together our 10-year projected plan is the uncertainty of what assets you will cover, what assets we will cover. And there are really, as you can imagine now, after 20 years, there's a lot that needs looking at. And that's probably going to fall into the hands of our incoming general manager. And to be blunt, we're not hurrying. We want to get a very good manager who will take us forward, and that may take time. So at the moment, we have an interim manager, David Walsh, which is very, very thankful. So another part of the projected finances, we've lost Charles, we've lost all that information. We are probably going to need to call on council staff to help our interim manager and the board to come to terms with that. Other than that, our bookings have always been good from about September onwards. So they were postponed or moved. We did, of course, lose the income that would have happened in April when we have one of our usually big investments from Abbey. At the moment, we're working on reopening, probably July. We've got plans for opening very slowly in July. Don't know if you've heard of FROGO, the fear of going out. Well, that is actually something that we are looking at too, because it's nice to hear that people are coming out to smaller places. We hope that will transfer into coming out into a bigger auditorium situation. So that could have an impact on a lot of what we've been planning and our financials. So we hope you'll bear with us on how we feel our way about being post-COVID, something none of us have ever experienced before. So we're all going to hope we're all working together to ensure that everything just moves along steadily and slowly, and we all build. Yes, the bookings are good, and we're getting them starting to come back in. But as I think the Mayor is, we've got other issues there too, as I think the Council is also aware, so that we are not taking bookings at this time. David, do you have a follow-up?
I don't have a few things I want to talk about. We'll talk about that after we've discussed this document with Council.
Okay, so we're open for questions. Anybody?
Yeah, let's have questions.
Okay. Councillor Rutherford.
See if they can answer them.
Thank you. Just one question. I just wasn't quite sure of your final comment about something about the me and you that you weren't taking bookings.
That's a confidential matter that we're not at liberty to discuss in this forum. There was an email from the General Manager about that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that's my foot and mouth usual. Do it often.
We'll just stop that one there. It's fine. Thank you. Any questions on anything we can talk about in this forum? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David and Susan, for the presentation overview of the statement of intent. I just wanted to inquire a little bit around the financials that you show on page 11 of the draft. Give you a second to find that. And it sort of, Susan, it sort of relates to what you were describing in terms of still having some ongoing aspirations around, fitting out the sound system more comprehensively, et cetera. And just seeing that, this year there was 400 and some thousand in terms of grants received for CapEx, and then in the next 3 years it's 40,000, 30,000, 50,000, so quite a lot smaller amounts that are there. And just wanted to understand, is that because you see a lower need for capital coming into the region, or is that because you think there's lower availability of grants to meet that need?
It's a bit of both, really. The expenditure that we've have allowed for, we're comfortable that we'll be able to raise ourselves, and that has certainly some influence on how much those figures are. We know that there's a lot of people going to be talking to all the trusts out there to get this the available funds. We're lucky we have the Friends of the Region, and they don't give to anybody else but us. Well, they haven't yet. They better not in the future. So really, those figures are just to complement the huge amount that we've spent this year.
And I guess to clarify on my end, does that meet the expectation of the sort of description that you were giving us, Susan, around the completion of sound system and other things that are on your list that are needed?
I talked with the outgoing manager about that, and he said that in fact we are looking to do that by sourcing externally. So that's why I would say that 443 would be part of the grant that came from you guys for the sound system. Why we haven't got the next lot is we believe that we're going to be able to source the monies ourselves. However, as we sit down and talk with Bryce about maintenance and ongoing assets and things like that, that may change. So this is a projection as we could do at this moment, the best we could do at this moment. Is that?
That's helpful to hear and to have clarified at this stage.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Madam Chair.
That seems to be all of the questions. So David, you had something else you wanted to raise.
I really just wanted to talk about, where to from here, and we've done a little bit of research into what happens after a pandemic, and the research has showed that after the Spanish flu, people were reluctant to come back to major venues for quite a while, and so we've always got that fear in the back of our minds that we're not going to fill these shows, and a good example of that is the work that we're doing at the moment with Abbey Musical Theatre. And restaging Sister Act that was cancelled, obviously because of COVID. And we're backing that show and expect to make a loss. But we see that as our contribution, A, to the local community theatre, but B, to getting back, sitting on our seats, those people in this town at least, that will support it simply because it's an Abbey show and their daughter's in it or their aunt's in it or whatever. So we see that as a way of introducing the people back to the theatre. The other great advantage that we have at this present point is our new sound system. and it is, believe me, it is unbelievable. It blow you away. It's brilliant. And so we're planning a little bit of a reopening session for lunchtime concerts, we'll call them, but it's not concerts, it's your favourite music. So we'll invite the mayor to give us his top 100 tunes or whatever, and we'll have that playing over the lunch period, maybe a 2-hour period. And just invite the public to come in, sit down with their, well, hopefully not their packet of fish and chips, but sit down with their sandwiches and listen to the music. One day we'll have the Mayors, one day we'll have rock, one day we'll have musicals, one day we'll have whatever, country and western, whatever it is. So again, just a way of bringing the people, getting them used to coming back through our doors. Our main problem is, whilst our bookings are good for the future, our international shows, of course, there are none. We have some bookings, but we don't think they'll happen for many, many months yet with the closing of the borders. So whilst we've got some great bookings for New Zealand shows, we are lacking the Billy Connollys and the, we've got a few tribute shows. What's his name? Johnny Cash tribute show, a few of those, but they're all Kiwis. But the big stuff, the Russian ballet and those sorts of things that involve special entry through the ports, we're just not going to see them. And so we'll be a little bit different from the globe in that area. You know, the smaller the venue, the more local or New Zealand talent there will be, but we will have a bit of an issue there. So whilst we're positive, you know, our fingers are crossed as well. What else did I want to say? That's all really. Charles's farewell, we certainly want to acknowledge, and this is as good a forum as any to acknowledge his around about 40-year involvement with the Regent in some form or other. And so we're having an invitation only farewell for him, which will be in the mail shortly. Yes. Yeah, this week hopefully. Councillors and the mayor and etc. Well, of course, will be invited. So we invite you to come along. I'm not sure, 100 people, 120 people, something like that. An invitation only event just to recognise his involvement. He is also, we have invited him to switch on the new sound system. So that's Saturday, what day are we opening this year? 6th of July, okay, on the Monday. So he'll be there for bring his sandwiches along with the mayor, hopefully, and we'll have 1 or 2 quick speeches. And Charles will flick the switch and we'll all be amazed by the sound. So that's us. It's going to be an interesting year. We've just appointed a new trustee, I guess you should know, under our co-option policy. Phil Payton, he's a solicitor from Fielding. And we, with the departure of Morris Rowe, that was a gap in our board. So we think we've got a very wide-ranging a wide range of talents on our board, and things are ticking over nicely.
Good to hear. Thank you very much, David. There are no further questions, so thank you for coming to make your presentation today. I'll ask you to rotate through so we can call up Te Manawa next, and we'll take Te Manawa and then we will take a break for some afternoon tea. So, Te Manawa. We have John Folk, Andy Lowe, Catherine Parsons. I feel like saying the usual suspects. Thank you all for coming to make your regular presentation. John, will hand over to you to present, and you use your team as you see fit. I don't think you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And use my team as I see fit. I'm not sure that's going to go down very well. Look, I don't propose to recap on the effects of COVID-19 and the obvious effect on our visitor numbers and all the things that we all know and will expect. During the period that we've been working on this statement of intent, as I noted in my introduction, we held a workshop where a workshop was enabled for us with elected representatives of the council. And that actually resulted in us bringing forward a number of different action items. Now, I've recited those broadly in the introduction. I won't go through them. But what we've also done is decant that down into some items that have gone into our statement of intent and some items that we're incorporating into a business plan that we have currently under action. We've also developed quite a comprehensive trust board work plan, which I won't bore you by reciting at the moment or frighten board members with. But I guess really there are two aspects to that. Firstly, we're working quite strongly through the balance of this year on those matters that were brought up by councillors in the workshop so that we can, if you like, more closely align ourselves with their desires and aspirations for Te Manawa. But also we're working behind that with our team at Te Manawa to try and align them in with those objectives as well. So it will be quite an interesting next few months as we work through all that process. But of course, business as usual has to carry on too. A couple of things just on a positive note looking forward before we look at questions. Two things I guess that we're focusing on for this next period is the celebration of Palmerston North sesquicentennial next year and the possible contributions that Te Manawa can make to that, both individually and in consultation and connection with the other CCOs, because I think that'll give us an opportunity to actually try and do more together and bring things forward. But the other aspect that we're concentrating on is the ability to try and create more pop-up style exhibitions. And again, that can be with the other CCOs, or it could be in other venues around the city. So we're asking our teams to sort of step back from a completely traditional model of big exhibitions that are carefully curated and in white box spaces, and come more to the type of pop-up that, if people remember, we used what looked like a mobile chicken coop that Andy had designed when he was in the Waikato. And we had that sitting outside Te Manawa at one stage with various objects in it. Now, those objects weren't the precious type of objects that require large security systems and air conditioning, but they're the sort of things that we could get out into the community, show some things that are, if you like, iconic of or representative of the Manawatu and Palmerston North, and just get out there and say, we're here are some things that you can interact with and get a little bit of interest and excitement from. So those are, I guess, two of the themes that we're drawing through. The rest of this will emerge, obviously, as we move through our SOI and also into the next long-term plan. So I'll just hand over to the others if they have any comments. No? They're very quiet for a change. All right, thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, John. So we'll open for questions for the Regent. If I could start, John, or maybe for Andy, in the officers' report, there's the comparison of Te Manawa's SOI with the council statement of expectation. And in that, the final column there of comments for the final statement of expectation, there are a few about expanding your what we will do section and a separate how we operate section. I wondered if you had any comment on the officers' suggestions there. How comfortable are you with what's being proposed? Sorry, need the paperwork. So I'm looking at page 21 of the order paper.
O kia ora koutou, ngā mahine ka koutou katoa I rangi te kaupapa te rā. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, we've been working, and as John was saying, a lot of the stuff is going to fold into our other work. So business planning and strategies around the various components in terms of education and marketing and all those things. So we feel like this will be incorporated into that. If it's not at a high level in the statement of intent, it will be, folded down into other things we're doing.
Okay, thank you. That helps me with that. Any questions? Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for coming in and speaking. I don't know what page I'm looking at, but in the forecast of visitor numbers, I was curious to understand why the 3 yearly prediction was 150, 160, and then back to 150. And I just wondered what was happening in year 3 to deter 10,000 people.
That's right. Thanks very much, Alicia. We're just in that year with 160, we've got a touring exhibition that we've got underway at the moment coming in that we think is going to bring in a lot of people. And so then, you know, every second year we're trying to do a touring show, much as we know that getting things in from other countries is going to be tricky. This one would come from Australia, and there's other opportunities too around other shows coming from Australia. So that particular year, that's a big one. Then there's a year that's not so big. Then after that, we hope to do it again. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm intrigued. I know the draw cards in the past have been quite exciting, so I look forward to hearing more about that one. Thank you.
I had a question. Oh, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming in. I've just got a couple of questions around the financials. On page 101, it talks about the operating revenue having increased targets for fundraising and sponsorship. And then on looking at the revenue on page 103, there's the fundraising and sponsorship goes up for a few years, but then it drops from 290,000 to 200 in that third year. And I was just wondering if there was a reason why you were anticipating that reduction. And also quite a significant reduction in the other revenue, going down from 389 to 181 in that third year.
In the second year, as Andy said, we are expecting to have the blockbuster show, and we're focusing on fundraising for that. We haven't got something for that in the third year.
Okay, thanks. And the second question was also around the operating revenue. And in the second line down on that page, the Manawatu District grant of 20,000 has actually dropped from the 18-19 year to 20,000 and it's stayed quite low. And I'm just wondering, have there been conversations about looking to increase that? And if so, I'd be interested to hear. And also, do we have any understanding of the portion of visitors to Te Manawa actually come from the Manawatu District?
Unfortunately, we will have to revise this budget because Manawatu District Council's withdrawn the grant. We received a notification 2 weeks ago, so that's come out of our revenue. The difference between the 20,360 and the 20,000 is 1 year they gave us a cost of living inflation and this year they didn't.
But however, rather than increasing, it is disappearing completely. In answer to your second question, though, Karen, I think one of the things that we're working on following that workshop that we had, and you'll recall we had some conversation around there, around this, is that we want to develop a better visitor survey mechanism. And as was mentioned earlier with respect to Globe, my view is that you can't expect people to fill in forms I won't fill in forms. By the time I leave somewhere, I'm halfway in the car and I'm on the way home. I think we need to work at some of the survey type systems I've used previously, which rely on sending people a text that they can just quickly flick back, or an email, because I'll answer by text or email. I don't know about the rest of you, but if I can do it in 5 seconds that way, I'll do it. Otherwise, I probably won't bother. So yeah, we really want to collect more information about people, where they've come from, what they really like or dislike about what they've seen at Te Manawa, and whether they'll come back. Okay. So yeah, we really do want to do some work on that in the next year.
Thank you. And perhaps just following up my previous question around the Pncc operating grants that are outlined at the top of page 101. That third year reduction, I assumed was a mistake, but given your comments around other changes in that third year, is that reduction in the Pncc operating grant correct, or is that an error?
There's an error on page 101 or page 17 that just hasn't been updated. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so the error on page 101 but it is correct on page 103.
Yes.
That the operating grant for 2022-23 is 3,395,769. Thank you.
Well, actually, that's down 2.
That's down 2?
Well,
not got the...
it wasn't at the time we prepared the figures, but we've been advised that our inflation adjustment will be less.
Yes, because we've adjusted inflation across the board. That makes sense. Okay. Any further questions for Tamana? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just interested, being the TM 2025 project being quite a forefront of where you were heading today. Can I just understand where that sits strategically for you, just so I can understand where we're aligning this current SOIs?
We'll be updating our strategic plan as part of our board work plan this year. But I think with respect to TM 2025, that's really merged or been merged now into a wider council strategy, I think, that will evolve over the next few years, and whether this current year will affect it or not. Obviously, I don't know, you guys will determine that. But I think really what's going to happen now is that there'll be a more integrated strategy. Well, this is I'm guessing, because I don't know.
Well, perhaps I can comment on that then,
Yeah,
John.
you might
Say there
want
is a
to.
report on the work schedule for planning and strategy for August this year, which will cover the civic and cultural precinct work, and that will provide the update that I think you're seeking, Councillor Dennison.
So I think with respect to us, we're waiting to see what emerges from that and then what our part will be in that.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, John and team, for the presentation of the SOI. Just wanted to follow up the question as well, just around the fundraising and sponsorship numbers. Just noting that the 18-19 number was 5 figures. This year looks like it might be in the 4 to 5 figure range, and sort of looking to jump that up to $250,000 plus in the next 3 years, and recognizing sort of some of the economic realities that we're probably going to see in those years, and just wondering to what extent the board has sort of pressure tested this budget, and particularly the assumptions that might sit in behind the fundraising and sponsorship.
I think in terms of fundraising and sponsorship, one of the things that we want to focus on again as we move through the next 2 or 3 months is developing a proper fundraising and sponsorship plan. And again, you'll recall that we did get a pretty clear direction to do that from that workshop that we held. Sorry to keep going back to that, but we were actually listening. The other thing too, I think, is that with respect to the financials, when you see our revised budget come out, you'll find that Catherine has pressure tested everybody and every item in it, so that we believe it will be a robust and achievable figure, or figures moving forward. The other impact of that is that when we correlate that back to our cash reserves, we're being very careful with the maintenance of those as well as our overall equity. So there is a pretty, I nearly said pretty robust, there's a robust financial plan in behind that, but we are still testing some components of that. I should mention also, you'll recall that we got some direction about our education strategy and the net cost of that to Pncc, and we're working hard to begin the development of a better strategy for that area of our operation as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think that concludes all of the questions. So thank you all for coming in and presenting. We're going to take a break now. I'm going to adjourn for 15 minutes, which I think brings us back at 10:02. Yes, starting at 10:02, please. I think there is a hot drink available, so our board members and visitors are very welcome to join us for a cup of tea in the next 15 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. If we can reconvene. It's like a family reunion. You'd think we hadn't seen each other 3 months. Thank you all. So, thank you, Natalia. Back on screen. Having concluded questions, I will just note there was a question raised by Keisha Birch about the officers' report. And I'd said that I would come back to asking the officers to answer that question, and I didn't, but I can explain my thinking on that, which was that the question had been, I've lost my piece of paper now, flicking. The question had been asked about a comment in the officers' report about requiring a change to the statement of intent, reduce council operating grant to the level set in the 10-year plan, adjusted for inflation, and update expenses accordingly. That comment appears in both Keisha Birch and the Globe because they'd both signalled an intention to apply for an increased operational grant and had included that operational grant in their statement of intent. So the officers' report is simply signalling that the statement of intent shouldn't predetermine the outcome of our long-term plan discussions. So that's what the officer's comment refers to, and I'm happy with that there. On the subject of the operating grant requests, following the questions and answers, we have rescoped slightly the recommendations that will appear on the screens. They are slightly different to the recommendations that were in the paper, but I will move as an alternative recommendation to the ones pre-circulated. So just to direct you to that the new 8 and 9 say that the proposal in the Globe Theatre and Keisha Birch Trust Board draft statements of intent for an increase of $50,000 or $40,000 per year is referred to the 10-year plan process. The intention there, just in that tweak of wording, was not to signal a commitment to give that funding, but simply that is the process that it will go to next. So hopefully that answers some of the concerns there. The other recommendations remain as pre-circulated in the officer's report. So the new 8 and 9 replacing 6 and 7. So I'm happy to move all of those, seconded by Councillor Barrett. We'll open for comments on all of that, if anybody has any. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been really valuable to meet with all the CCOs, and thank you all for coming. These opportunities are really valuable in having open dialogue with us. And as we move forward into considering, our LTP process and considering many competing priorities, I think it is really helpful for us to have that engagement with CCOs to understand how they see the benefit of the increased investment. And I do hope that we have that opportunity at some time in the future to have that further dialogue, so that we have that understanding before we embark on what is often a very sterile process of prioritisation through the LTP, where we are looking at pieces of paper and rating things from 1 to 10. So to have that real valuable engagement with the people prior to that, to have an understanding of how that investment brings value to ratepayers, I think would be useful. And so I do hope that we can have that in the future. But in the meantime, it's been great to hear from each CCO today. And in particular, I want to acknowledge and applaud the initiatives that the Regent are taking to address FOGO. I really like the ideas that they've come up with, and hope that those are very beneficial to our community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to briefly comment on 2 points. One is it's good to see the CCOs already in a bounce back sort of mode, and thinking positively about the future and thinking adaptively about how they're going to move into that future. Also wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that a number of the statements of intent now have quite explicit mention of environmental sustainability and thinking about emissions measurement within them, and that's a signal that we sent a year ago as a council, and so it's very good to see that starting to come through here. And to some extent, that relates to my comment in the earlier meetings today around thinking about how we actually take a whole of our built assets approach around monitoring energy usage and looking at energy efficiency. I think that there might be some scope there for us as a council to actually do that in a way that would be more efficient than asking each individual entity to redevelop and reinvent an energy efficiency sort of approach. So hopefully there can be a bit of complementarity in how we look at that in the future. But very good to see these statement of intents and to hear from the CCOs today, and wish them well in the journey ahead. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So final comments from me, say, Keisha Birch, an ambitious programme going forward, I wrote down there, and subject to LTP discussion, a lot in there for us to think about as we move through into next year's work from our letter of expectation through, and I'd expect that we'll have many discussions about that, councillors. The Globe, I think seeing the benefits of being small and nimble in that theatre space already picking up, and really appreciate the positivity that saw that fast pivot from open under level 2 conditions to open under level 1, and the difference that made in just the booking numbers of being able to book without having to think about social distancing. People do still have those concerns, but I think if we're talking to our community, we can find a way to accommodate their concerns whilst enabling them to go out. So good to see the Globe leading out on that, and always appreciate their ambition and positivity. Regent, I just want to say how absolutely delighted I am that you've taken the step of backing Abbey Musical Theatre's attempts to get Sister Act back on stage, recognising that that comes at a significant cost potentially to the Regent and your cash reserves. So thank you on behalf of the city for taking that step, because we know that particularly the work of the Regent is an economic development agency as much as anything else. You bring people into the city for theatre, and that means they go for drinks, they go for meals. Some people travel into the city from quite a wide region in order to go to the shows that you put on your stage. So recognising the tension that you're working in, of the difficulties of the international market, but also very glad that we have such a strong local and national market to draw on. And thank you for your contributions there. To Manu, I think you've teased very successfully your touring show that is planned. We have all got bated breath now to see what that is. I hope you haven't overpromised and will underdeliver, because we will take a dim view of that. And John, I'm intrigued by, as an accountant, pretty robust financials. Is that like Stephen Joyce's pretty legal? I don't know. Pretty robust financials. So thank you for coming in to speak. I will note in this forum how disappointed I am with the position taken by Manawatu District Council in removing their funding from what is a regional facility. They've come to a position in their budget off the back of our budget, and I personally am not happy with that. It might be a small amount of money, but it signals something about their intention and their contribution. And I would like to see us express that in no uncertain terms to our Manawatu colleagues. Recognising that this discussion about regional facilities has rumbled around our territorial authorities for the last few years. There was the Horizons discussion, where we asked Horizons to take a lead in funding regional facilities. And admittedly, the conversation then tended to be about sporting facilities, as it often is, but arts facilities also fall into that category. And this is what we find, is that Pncc has been left as the funder of last resort again. We take our responsibilities to our community seriously, and I'm disappointed that Manawatu District don't seem to take the same view. I won't say any more on that. So, we have the recommendations in front of us. Would anybody like to separate anything out, or are we happy to take them together? I'll take that as happy to take them together. Happy to do it on the voices? then we'll put that to the vote. All those, can we scroll through them all so we can see them? 8 and 9 replace 6 and 7, they've been struck through. 1 to 5 are as are in your papers in front of you or on your screen in front of you. Seconded by Councillor Barrett. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Abstention? Carried. Thank you. So we'll move to item 8 on our agenda. Which is a report from Bryce Hosking, Manager of Property. Maintenance and renewal plans and budgets for cultural facilities. As Bryce comes, I will note that the genesis of this report came from a submission to an annual budget a couple of years ago from one Susan McConaughey, who noted that the toilets in Square Edge were of a shocking quality at the moment. And we hastened to deal with that issue, but it triggered a wider question about how we look at the maintenance and renewal of our cultural assets. So be careful what you wish for when you come and make a presentation to council. And thank you to Bryce for presenting this. It's deliberately on the agenda at the same time as the CCOs are in the room so that we're able to connect the dots on all of this. But Bryce, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sitting with me here is Sarah Hall. So she's the facilities management team leader in my team. So I thought it would be quite useful to bring her insight into this meeting as well. And she may be able to answer any questions that come from this that perhaps I may not. Happy to take majority of the report as read, but there are a couple of things I would like to, I guess, summarise to begin with. I guess the first one being the property team over the last 12 months has been going through quite a significant transformation. It really has meant that we've been maturing in what we're doing. We've been making a lot of improvements in the way we do asset management planning, the way we deliver our projects, and a particular focus on facilities management in particular. Hence Sarah's appointment and actually creating a new team that's actually dedicated towards facilities management, so we can be getting a lot more consistency in the way we do things. It really has resulted us getting a much better understanding of the condition of our assets and all the various components, understanding their life cycles, where they're at. However, I guess through getting better in this space, it has uncovered, I guess, a number of issues that sort of are making life a little bit more complicated than desired, I suppose. And I tried to highlight those in particular in section 4. It really is proving to be a little bit of an imbalance, I suppose, historically, in terms of where the spend has been going. Some of these facilities are bigger than others. You know, when you look at things like carpet in one centre may be worth a lot more than others. So I'm not necessarily talking dollars, but pure volume of work that's been going into some centres. And I think a lot of that's sort of coming down to, again, that sort of understanding our assets and understanding sort of where we're at. In some centres, we've been a lot better at that historically than we have in others. And as a result, there hasn't always been, I guess, as solid a rationale as I guess I would like. And that's sort of some of that poor prioritisation, I'll get my word right, through some of these works. But the other issue that really has sort of become quite apparent is quite a blurred line or a very grey area when it comes to responsibility, especially in this portfolio, interestingly, compared to other areas of the total property portfolio, around responsibility of the tenant or the CCO in terms of what are they actually meant to be planning for, what are they working towards their fundraising for, and equally so from our side of things, what is council meant to be doing in this space, what should we be budgeting for, and what should we be planning for. So it's quite apt timing, I guess, leading into the next 10-year plan. This is a good time to have this discussion. So I have tried to put forward a proposal that's sort of in line within this report with how we manage most of our facilities. But I guess the most important thing is we can set the bar as high or low as you want. Some of the items that I might have flagged as tenant responsibilities or CCO responsibilities could become ours. However, if that is the case, then coming with that comes funding, I suppose, to actually do that work. So that's really all I really wanted to touch on, I suppose. So happy for questions.
Thank you, Bryce. We'll open for questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Bryce. And apologies if I have missed this somewhere, but was there some consultation with the CCO boards about the content of this report, or is this entirely from a council officer perspective?
So there has been consultation. We have been working with them. So I guess one thing that was identified as part of the property transformation is we probably haven't been as good at working with our tenants and working with the CCOs as we could be. I think that's sort of emphasising the fact that I've never been so popular. My name got name dropped about 4 times through that sort of previous presentations. So we have definitely been having conversations with them. And I guess it really emphasised how apparent that was, that we were doing some works for some areas and some for not. For some CCOs, we've been doing the painting inside and out, and others we've been saying actually that's their responsibility, so they've been trying to do that themselves. Things like security systems, air conditioning systems and things like that. Some CCOs are provisioning them themselves, trying to do their own fundraising. In other cases, we do it for them. So we have been working with them. I wouldn't say we're in 100% agreement necessarily. But yeah, I mean, what we've put forward is in line with, I guess, our general approach to this area. And even though every centre is different, the approach to facilities management and asset management is quite consistent. So, yeah, as I said, the bar can move up and down, however council sees fit, really.
So if we were to accept your recommendation of the division of responsibility that's in this report, is that likely to result in an increased budget for maintenance for council or a decreased budget? Or is it just a different budget, applied in different ways?
A reprioritisation is probably a good point. I think one key thing we're doing as part of the next 10-year plan is planning that area and actually getting a lot more robust around our costings. So as part of that process, I'd be able to answer that a lot more definitively as part of the 10-year plan. In some areas it will go up, but equally so. And for some of the CCOs in some areas, maybe some of their costs to maintain some of their now items may also go up as well.
So there's no sort of hidden agenda of having a cost-cutting solution for council. It's more a rationalising of how the maintenance is done to try and make it consistent.
Very much so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Bryce, for this report. How does this affect council's decision to, I guess, look at energy efficiency type things, if that is something that council will want to do? For example, with when you're looking at the Regent, the Globe and Square Edge, their power costs, and Keisha Birch, so those organisations, their power costs at the moment are around 100k a year. So that's not including Te Manawa. If the council wanted to do things to kind of cut down budgets and in terms of making it cheaper to run these organisations and put in energy efficiency type things by putting in capital items that would end up having a better OPEX outcome, how would this affect that?
So whenever we're doing any kind of maintenance, replacement, especially capital renewal work, the sustainability, energy efficiency piece is definitely something that comes into everything we do. So whenever we're replacing lighting, for instance, is an obvious one, we're always looking at energy efficient options, upgrading to LEDs and things along those lines to be helping with, regardless of who's paying the power bill, essentially, whether it be us or the CCOs. That sustainability piece is definitely something that we keep in close focus over everything we do. If we can be looking at ways to be improving heating and things like that, and naturally as we look to replace items such as heat pumps and things like that, they become more efficient. They definitely become a lot more better at what they do. They require less power to be running and things along those lines. So I guess in a broad sense, what I'm saying is all work that we're doing that's driven from the property team, the sustainability and energy focus is something that comes through very strongly in what we do and affects our choices in the items that we actually put in place.
Okay, so so just to follow up on that a wee bit, with the maintenance side of things, if you've got things like curtains in the CCO's responsibility rather than our responsibility, wouldn't that have an impact on energy efficiencies? Things like carpets and...
Yes, it definitely would. All things right down to windows, double glazing, curtains, all those kind of things play a bit of a role. And I guess my advice would be working with the CCOs and also looking to be very, when we are working with them around things and they are looking to replace some of the items that might be on their list, encouraging them to also be sourcing those kind of things and making those kind of considerations in what they're doing. But the responsibility to replace those would still be theirs. So if they opted not to go with an energy efficient curtain, for instance, or a thicker model, then that would be their choice, but we would obviously be encouraging them to consider those things when they are doing their works.
Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Bryce. So the report highlights perhaps what's been a little bit of an inconsistent approach up to now and provides a recommendation for a framework for a more consistent approach. So if we're to adopt that today, the table that's on page 125 outlines the renewal programs for the 2021 year that's obviously just been confirmed through our annual budget. So would the intention be for that to stay as is and for the consistent framework to apply from the following year, or would there be some level of intention to revisit the items in the 2021
Good question.
Budget?
The work that's sort of been proposed here is relatively in line with this anyway. So this was planned work. We do have budget provision to be doing this. So the proposal outlined in clause 4.8 and 4.9, I guess, is what I'm proposing that would be adopted. But those works that are planned would be proceeding as planned.
So just to follow up, so the what has been budgeted, you're saying that is fairly well in line with the recommended approach anyway?
Relatively, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bryce, we heard from one of the CCOs, I forget which, that some of this is a little contentious. So my question is, what is the appeal mechanism? If you can't negotiate it, does it come back here? What happens?
So in terms of if we'd sort of made a decision that curtains were their responsibility, they are having issues to fund the curtains. I think the previous example, what we had, I think this time last year around the sound system in the Regent is a good example of that. So, I'm using this sort of framework, that would be a tenant item. It was their responsibility to replace it, which the Regent were on board with at the time, but they were having issues in terms of funding it. So a separate report came up and that sort of discussion took place from there.
So there would remain that facility for an exception report to come to committee or through an annual budget to say this is not our responsibility, but we might choose to fund it anyway.
Absolutely, that's definitely council's decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Bryce, for the report. Just a couple questions that I've got for you. I suppose the first one sort of builds on where the chair was at in terms of, you acknowledged that things have been a bit gray there around where things actually sat, and we're going to draw a line, and that potentially sits a bit awkwardly. I guess the first question I have in that regard is sort of your thinking around drawing sort of one line across the four different CCOs, given they are four different CCOs, and sort of how you're seeing navigating that, both from a consultation point of view, as Councillor Johnson pointed out, but actually figuring out where that line needs to land.
Another good question. So yes, they are completely different, and they do definitely have different pulls and different pushes. And as I sort of highlighted earlier, the same item for different CCOs may hold a different value, a different replacement value, and it may be different in itself. Some carpet is a good example for that. In some of our CCOs, it may be a heritage carpet and it can only be sourced from a certain supplier. In other CCOs, that might not be the case, and it could just be simply replaced with a commercial vinyl or carpet as appropriate. I guess the approach we're looking to take is we've tried to be quite prudent around that and sort of considering the main items that are affecting the building fabric, I suppose, and the things that should a CCO, I guess, looking under a commercial lens, should they move on or relocate it or something to that, what would we be left with essentially as a landlord, and what would be left in the building if you turned it upside down and gave it a shake? Everything that fell out, I guess is a colloquial way of putting it, would be a tenant item, and everything that remained would be a landlord's. And we've sort of tried to consider those things, but then also considered, I guess, the current position around a number of these assets as well. So, for instance, security systems. If majority of the CCOs own their own security system except for one, actually looking to realign that accordingly to be getting a lot more consistency. Both for now, but also from a planning point of view over the next 10, 15, 20 years. If we're not around in 20 years' time, having a nice, robust framework that actually gives some solid direction from a budgeting and planning point of view, not only for council, but also the CCOs, so they can also be working on these kind of discussions as well.
Thank you. Just to drill in a little bit, and specifically on the security system point that you raised, is wanting to understand where the line sat there in terms of the security of the wider environment. And I guess the example that I'd use is the Globe Car Park, which has a very high frequency of patrons coming out after a show and discovering that their vehicle has been broken into, and just sort of where that line sits around our responsibility for the community and community safety and the CCO's responsibility.
Definitely. So, yep, there is, I guess, two ways we can be looking at that. So from a community safety point of view, much like a number of the other cameras around the city, not necessarily the ones attached to the CCOs, but they currently sit with us as our responsibility. And in some of these situations, that would probably remain. The Regent is another good example where there is actually a camera attached to the building. However, it is outward facing on the road, and that was installed by council. So there can be some clear delineations around that, depending on the focus of the security system, or equally so, council could choose to simply make anything attached to them relating to security a tenant responsibility or council's full responsibility, in which case my point, again, around the bar can be as high as low as we want, really. But for some of those kind of areas, I think that's a natural way to sort of change the focus. Is it looking out onto the street? Is it more in the public safety, or is it more from a security focus in terms of the CCO and their operation?
Thank you. Further, just wanted to inquire around sort of this idea of setting up this demarcation and thinking about what it might mean for the CCOs needing to raise funds, let's say, to buy their curtains. I guess in my limited experience raising funds, the first dollar is always the hardest to raise. And are we sort of undermining the fundraising ability by not allowing them to map some council resource to their own asset renewals in a way that allows them to say, we've got already half of the funds for the curtains raised, can we get the other half? Or are we making it unnecessarily hard on them to fundraise in this environment?
Purely from a facilities management point of view, I think there is that need for clarity. However, coming back to the chair's point from earlier, there's nothing stopping in terms of a funding mechanism or how the CCOs will be funding the specific items. There's nothing preventing them approaching council in a specific case to be helping to bridge that finance, I suppose, and help to build that business case necessarily. However, purely from a property budget point of view, I suppose the need for clarity is very important. The curtains in some places, but not others, type situation is very hard to manage.
Thanks. And final question, if I might, which is in the report. 3.19 sort of sets out a hierarchy of asset classes. And I was a little bit surprised to see that compliance was number 3 in a hierarchy of 4. And so I wanted to really understand why.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
And how many actual tiers are there? I mean, would we really let something sit non-compliant?
Yeah, so the intention of that section was to give a bit of a highlight reel, I suppose, of the kind of decision making we'll be looking to make. So if we are, I guess, needing to prioritise the work that we are looking to do, I guess what I was trying to emphasise is there is some decision making to that, and there is a bit of an order of things. So when we're looking at things like water tightness or other things that may be causing further damage, windows, roof leaks and things like that, could that wait? Generally, no. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with quickly. And then there's other things that are actually, I guess, more focused on their livability or operational ability. So things like bathrooms that work, kitchens that work, and things like that. Obviously, if we let them sit for a while, then in many cases they're unable to actually operate and do things that way. Compliance. There is a whole range of things when it comes to compliance, things like asbestos management and things like that. A number of our facilities have asbestos. However, in itself, unless it's being penetrated or broken, asbestos is actually quite a valid and quite a good product. It's very long lasting, it's very hardy, it provides its point of view. So while I'm putting them into a hierarchy, it doesn't necessarily mean that item 3 is very low on the agenda. In fact, from a budgeting point of view, in an ideal space, definitely the top 3, we would always be, they're very close, I suppose is what I'm saying, as opposed to a big distance between them.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful and appreciated, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think that has covered all of the questions. So thank you for presenting that report and
Thank
the
you.
work that went into getting us to this place. I am happy to move both of those recommendations. I will seek a seconder. Councillor Naylor, thank you. Open for comment if there are any. Councillor Barrett.
Just brief, I think it is good that and appreciated that the officers have done some of the work. I think is well underway, but I think what we heard from the CCOs and their comments and what we heard even from the officers here is there's still a bit of work to do in the full refinement of this approach. And I think we won't really know how well it's working or not working until we actually do draw the line, let it sit there for a while. And I think we'll soon enough discover if it's landed in the wrong place or not. I'm a bit of two minds around how appropriate the demarcation is relative to the needs of the CCOs. But at this point, willing to accept the officer's advice that it's a prudent starting point, and that if in future we need to review where that line sits, we'll have an opportunity to do that. So in the absence of having actually tried it out before, we will try it out now and see to what extent it meets the mutual needs of the CCOs and the council in this regard.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. So the recommendations in front of us, you'll note the second recommendation has been slightly amended by the addition of the words in the second line, in the cultural facilities portfolio, excluding the library, simply so that the recommendation can stand alone and doesn't accidentally commit the council to a approach that covers all of its assets. So that's just for clarity. I'll just say I do support where we've got to with this. It was an interesting conversation that came out of the Regent's sound system issues about what we own and what we don't own, and how do we provide support to CCOs who need our help without causing problems for ourselves down the line. So it's a piece of work that needs to be done. I have some sympathy with Councillor Barrett's position that we might not quite have got the line in the right place, but we won't know until we try. So let's try. And on that note, I will look to put these to the vote together. No objection to that on the voices. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Move to item 9, which is the report from Joanne Ransom options for formalising the relationship between the Palmerston North City Council and the New Zealand Rugby Museum. Now, Joanne is online. Kia ora, Jo, you're there somewhere.
I am online, but video doesn't seem to be working, I'm afraid, but I am definitely here.
That's slightly weird that it looks like you're Jerry, but never mind. Well, thank you, Jo. I'm very happy to take your report as read. If you've got any further comments or additional information to add to that.
No, happy to take it as read. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Joanne. Is there any reason why the Rugby Museum couldn't come under the strategic priority grant system?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. On the last page of my report, I did a small analysis of that, assisted by Julie from Strategy and Planning, and that is it would be very difficult for it to qualify because the strategic priority grants align to certain goals, and the Rugby Museum sits within the arts plan, but it's not a particularly comfortable fit. Could certainly apply, but it would be a less perfect fit than most other applications.
Okay, but I suppose there's what's proposed in this report is a non-competitive funding model, which very many organisations in the city don't have the security of. And so I just wondered why we felt that the Rugby Museum needed guaranteed funding in a non-competitive environment compared to, say, another organisation that does equally good work in the city that has to go through a competitive funding environment every 3 years.
You're correct, Councillor Johnson, and I can't answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Joanne, could you remind me, please, how has the Rugby Museum been funded by council, and how much have we funded them annually?
So annually they get rent-free accommodation within Te Manawa, and that has a value. Previous to that, they applied for a $20,000 grant for 2 years in a row through the annual budget process, and they did that again this year, and it was unsuccessful this year. So previously they've had a grant towards their archival costs.
And Joanne, I've mentioned last week, the government announced a museum hardship fund as part of their arts recovery package. Do you think that's the kind of fund that the New Zealand Rugby Museum might be successful in seeking funding from?
Look, I was talking to Stephen Berg from the Rugby Museum today about that, and it is a hardship fund. So, and it's 200 million for the whole country, and it's certainly something that could be looked at. But there are some kind of challenges around whether the Rugby Museum is in a position of hardship or not, given their balance sheet. And Stephen is in the room, I believe, if you wanted to ask some questions of the Rugby Museum.
Thank you, Jo. Yeah, Stephen, would you be able to comment on that? So Jo's alluding to your very healthy balance sheet. I suppose my thinking was coming from the fact that you've lost your rugby union funding. So are you in hardship, Stephen?
Yeah, that's correct. So we are in a very challenging position right now. We've had three sort of major funders, the Rugby Union, 35,000, the City Council for the last 3 years in a row, 20,000, and our tickets from our international visitors, which would be about 80,000. We've lost all three of those currently. So that means that for the foreseeable future, whilst we still have a small number of visitors, maybe 20%, those other two items, obviously with the 20,000 going, we will be operating from our reserves. We have a meeting tonight to discuss our ongoing budget and planning. The announced museums hardship fund is $2 million, not $200 million. And the museums across New Zealand that I'm a member of, Museums Aotearoa, are extremely unhappy with that amount of money. But ourselves, we'd be looking for about 80,000 from that. And there would be maybe 30 odd museums all looking for a piece of the pie.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a question to Joe, I think. Option 2 in the report on page 130, it says that that would, if we went with option 2, it wouldn't preclude an annual grant being made to New Zealand Rugby or either through the long-term plan or the annual plan round. So I'm just wondering, is option 2 a description of the status quo, the current arrangement? Is that correct?
That's a question for you, Joe, if you're still there.
Sorry,
Did you
yes,
catch that?
I did get the question, and yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
There's a similar situation with the Sculpture Trust where we don't have a formal agreement and they get an annual grant.
I'm happy to indicate, Madam Chair, that I'd be interested to progress option 2.
Thank you for indicating that. Is there any further? Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this report, although I can't look at you, but that's fine. On page 134, 5.2, relationship based on a funding agreement, and then it's got the cons in there. It says that an MOU or funding contract usually buys something, so there would be an expectation for NZRM to do something that it is not currently doing, or at least to certain deliverables or enter into an accountability regime. My specific question is, officers are not aware of any concerns council may have about NZRM operations and are unsure for what purpose to base an MOU on. Are you able to elaborate on that a wee bit?
General Manager Cheryl Bryant may like to contribute here as well. We had some discussion about this matter of an MOU and what it would be seeking to achieve.
If I can, through you, Madam Chair, clarify, when you're entering into an MOU, you need to be clear what the mutual benefit is to both parties. To the council, what's the council looking for from an MOU relationship, and what's the other party looking for from the council in terms of an MOU relationship. So the MOU could be an answer to something, but that something has to be defined in terms of what benefits that council is actually looking for from such a relationship that it would enter into an MOU.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Councillor Johnson.
Madam Chair, through you, is it okay to ask a question of Stephen?
Absolutely.
Stephen, do you have a preference for which of these two options would suit the Rugby Museum best? Like, is it, because I can see that they've each got pros and cons. So I'm not clear from the Rugby Museum perception what the better option is.
Yeah, we've indicated that option 1 would be a preferred option because we'd be looking at an agreement of some sort where we can say with security that we're going to get funded over 3 years on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Manager, I have just seen the column to the left under option 1 where it says where it does say that that's your view. I had just read that as being the officer's view. So apologies for that misreading. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a query, and through you perhaps to Stephen, as there is a comment under option 2. Without the COVID situation, the museum does not favour this option due to the uncertainty around the museum rent, building site and long-term tenure. Is there any foundation to those worries that we should be aware of?
One is that we're in a building which is earthquake prone. Two is we don't have a current lease. Te Manawa would be able to support that. Our lease expired in June 2018. So those are a couple of our concerns. Yeah, they are valid.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to Rugby Union withdrawing its support for the Rugby Museum, have you had any indication from them that this is seen as just a one-off for this next financial year, or is this a no commitment from this point on? Can I just understand the status?
We believe that it's just this year.
And can I just confirm again?
No, we've had no indication whether it's a one-off or not.
Can I understand the value of their support? Most recently, the last financial year, what?
35,000.
Thank you. After questions, I would like to comment further. Thank you.
I think we've exhausted the questions. So thank you, Joanne. Thank you both for coming in from the Rugby Museum to help us understand that relationship. As we move into comment, we'll move the recommendations in front of us and seek a seconder for those recommendations. The Barrett's indicated he will second that. My reasons for moving them as circulated is that this is developing a proposal to go to the long-term plan process. So a further discussion for that. I'm also recognising that, yes, the Rugby Union might come back in with future funding, should we all bounce back as energetically as we expect to. But as the Rugby Museum have said, there is no guarantee of that. And also that the Rugby Museum has relied over the last few years on Palmerston North City Council funding for mostly curatorial work. And this year we have not been able to provide that funding for reasons well traversed today. So they find themselves in a position where they have no guaranteed funding and no certainty of funding going forward. And my intention in moving the options in front of us is to seek to find a way to give them that certainty and discuss what that might look like. So would anybody else like to comment on that? Councillor Johnson, Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just before I make a comment, just a question for clarification. I'm not really clear from that whether you're moving option 1 or option 2.
Option for me. Well, that's probably a good point for clarification because I meant option 1, and if that's not clear, then we should amend the instruction there.
Well, I think perhaps we could add some words to the second recommendation that talks about certainty of fixed funding or relationship based on a funding agreement, because otherwise I could interpret recommendation 2 as being option 2.
Okay. We'll just put as per option 1, I think provides that clarity there. And then you had a comment, or was that?
Yes, I do have a comment, but are we happy that we just, as per option? Okay, yes, my comment is that I think that security of funding is important for organisations, and it's something that we provide to many community organisations through the strategic priority grants, giving a certainty of 3-year funding. And I think as a council, we've tried to work to not have a situation where organisations have to come to us every year, cap in hand, looking for money, and therefore I support a longer term commitment to funding for the Rugby Museum. And I take on board the comments from Ms. Ransom about the awkwardness of the Rugby Museum sitting in that strategic priority grant space. So I'm happy to have a separate sort of individual funding agreement for the Rugby Museum. And I think that gives more security and it a little bit removes it from the political sphere of having to come back on an annual basis looking for money. And who knows, they might hit a year when we're trying to get a rates rise below 2% and not get their money. So I would rather see a 3-year funding option.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. As I indicated before, I was in favour of option 2, so I won't support the recommendation that's in front of us. My reason being, there's no doubt that the work that the New Zealand Rugby Group Museum is a really valuable, thing to have in our city, and there are many valuable groups who would be seeking our funding, and I can recognise that option 1 definitely does give them that certainty of funding. However, as we go into our LTP, there's going to be many competing priorities, and I think setting up a certainty of funding at this point predetermines that debate and the decision-making process in terms of how we prioritise our funding. I also think it could well set up a precedent that many groups in the city come to us wanting certainty around their funding agreements in this sort of way. So I guess I do think we've got good processes with our annual budgets and our long-term plans, and option 2 certainly does give us the opportunity for us to consider that and for that to be a part of the long-term plan. And I consider that would be a fairer way to address this need.
Thank you. Councillor Dennison and Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of your recommendation to look at something in our long-term plan. I believe some confidence from this council to indicate that we're open to that now is what's needed. This is a national collection of international interest that promotes and celebrates our national game. I just think it's such a special opportunity to showcase, and it's unfortunate the Rugby Museum's found their budget so tight they can't find 35,000. But certainly if we're considering options to refer to the long-term plan for an extra staff member here and there from other CCOs, that we can't consider such a why it might seem moderate amount for the Rugby Museum, it's quite a significant contribution and a commitment to them. The other aspect that we've got to address at some point, which we're aware of, is that earthquake strengthening, because sure, we can work out some intent to have a longer term relationship with the space that they currently enjoy, but recognising that it has some earthquake issues. But I wouldn't want to see any withdrawal from Te Manawa's point of view for not giving them a space that's is really being fitted out for the purpose of showcasing that collection and storing it, the archives. So definitely supportive of referring it. And it's unfortunate our budget's so tight this year, otherwise I would have been happy to kind of meet the difference this year. Yeah, and I've got strong support. I'm unwavering in that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That may comment may be quite helpful given what I'm about to say. With my seconding of the recommendations that occurred sort of before option or before the second recommendation was clarified, and I probably am more of an option 2 sort of position rather than option 1, and so recognizing that I think it's 4:47 according to the clock over there. Not wanting to enter into any sort of complexity unnecessarily, but would prefer if somebody else was seconding this.
You can always vote against it anyway. But
that's going to happen as well.
Councillor Dennison seconding. Thank you. And my apologies. I should have checked that amendment with the seconder. So that was my error and not his. Thank you. No further comments. We'll look to vote. We've added an extra recommendation in there, which is simply the normal that the report be received. And we'll go through those. Then I do have one final recommendation I'd like us to look at. So taking those two together by division. We'll do one on the voices, shall we? Good call. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. So all those in favour of recommendation 1, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Division for recommendation 2, please, Hannah.
Councillor Naylor?
Against.
Against. Councillor Johnson?
For.
For. Councillor Barrett?
Again.
Against. Councillor Dennison? For. Councillor Dingwall?
Against.
Against. Councillor Bowen?
For.
For. Councillor Hancock?
For.
For. Deputy Mayor Utukere? For. Councillor Petrinas?
For.
For. Councillor Meehan?
For.
For.
Thank you, Hannah. That's carried 7 votes for and 3 against. I want to move to an additional recommendation that I've put up with Councillor Barrett's support, knowingly this time, that the Chief Executive provide assistance to the Rugby Museum if it chooses to seek funding through the Central Government Museum Hardship Fund. Simply that there does seem to be an opportunity to seek emergency funding there. I think we've established that there is a hardship element, and if we can help you to do that, then I think I would like us to think that we could. So happy to take any comments on that, otherwise we'll move to vote. So no comments. Excellent, getting close to dinner time. Are we happy to do that on the voices? All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried unanimously, thank you. Which takes us to our last item on the agenda, item 10, which is the work schedule for 2020. The General Manager indicated there was no comment to be made on that, so we'll take it as read unless people have questions. There are no questions. So we will vote to receive the work schedule for June 2020. We'll do that on the voices. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And on that note, just before 5 o'clock, no reira na mihi nui kia koutou e na mana e na reo. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all.